right, everyone, buckle up for our deep dive.
Yeah.
It's election night 2024.
Huge.
And we're talking about this presidential rematch.
Right.
Harris versus Trump.
Definitely.
The energy is palpable.
Absolutely.
Over 75 million Americans have already voted.
It's unprecedented.
It really is.
And it just speaks volumes
Yeah.
about how much this election means to people.
For sure.
And, the polls
Yeah.
showing Harris ahead by just 1.2 points nationally.
Tiny lead.
It's basically a statistical tie.
So a statistical tie.
Uh-huh.
But you always say those national polls don't really give us the whole picture.
Right. You have to kind of zoom in
Okay.
on these 7 key swing states.
All right, let's do it.
Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Nevada.
Okay, so all the usual suspects.
All the usual suspects, exactly.
The big players.
They hold a combined 93 electoral college votes.
Wow.
And remember, 270 is the magic number to win the presidency.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is that recent polls from Atlas Intel have Trump actually leading in all 7 of these battleground states.
Oh, wow. So that really is
Yeah.
a curveball.
It's a very interesting development.
Okay. Well, let's walk through what we can expect tonight.
Sure.
What's the election night timeline looking like?
Well, we already got our first results in
Okay.
from the tiny town of Dixville Notch, New Hampshire.
Oh, yeah.
They've got a tradition of voting right at midnight.
Right.
And get this, it's a tie.
A tie right out the gate?
I know.
This is already living up to the hype.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be a long night.
I have a feeling.
Most polls across the country will be open between 7 and 9 a.m. local time.
Okay.
And the real action kicks off as they begin to close,
Right.
around 6 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay.
That's when the counting begins.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Georgia is expected to have early results,
Okay.
with all those early votes tallied by 8 p.m. Eastern.
Got it.
But other states are going to take a bit longer.
Why is that?
Well, Nevada, for instance, has implemented some new procedures. And Pennsylvania's rules for processing mail-in ballots mean they might not even start counting those until Election Day itself.
So we might be in for another long wait, like 2020.
It's looking that way.
Okay.
And that means the potential for anxiety and misinformation to spread is high.
For sure. All right, so let's talk scenarios.
Okay.
What are the possible outcomes we could be looking at
Sure.
as the night unfolds?
Well, let's start with a scenario that's unlikely,
Okay.
but still possible.
Okay.
What if one candidate just sweeps the Rust Belt?
Okay.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota,
All those.
all going decisively to one person.
Gotcha.
Or what if those national polls are wildly off?
Okay.
In those cases, we could actually have a clear winner tonight.
So a landslide victory possible,
It's possible.
but it sounds like we should be prepared for a longer process.
Absolutely. The more likely scenario is days of counting,
Oh, sure.
especially if Pennsylvania's results are delayed.
And I have a feeling you've got another scenario up your sleeve,
Yeah.
one that's a little less straightforward.
Let's call it the "it gets really messy" scenario.
Oh, boy.
Over 100 lawsuits have already been filed.
Wow.
And that's just the beginning.
Oh, goodness.
Add in the potential for recounts
Okay.
and what we call the blue shift phenomenon,
Okay.
where initial leads can shrink as mail-in ballots are counted,
Right.
and this election could drag on.
Hold on, blue shift.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Can you break that down a bit more for us?
Sure, it's a trend we've observed in recent elections,
Okay.
where the initial results,
Yeah.
based largely on in-person voting,
Mm-hmm.
favor one candidate.
Right.
But as mail-in ballots, which tend to lean more Democratic,
Okay.
are counted, the margin between the candidates can narrow.
I see.
It happened in 2020 in states like Pennsylvania and Georgia.
Uh-huh.
And it's one of the reasons why final results can take time.
So it's not just about counting votes,
Right.
but understanding the different ways people are voting
Absolutely.
and how that impacts the overall picture.
Yeah.
Exactly. Each state has its own rules and processes.
Yeah.
And those nuances can have a big impact
Sure.
on when and how we get definitive results. Oh, deep breaths, everyone.
Yeah.
We've got the potential for a quick resolution,
Right.
a drawn-out count,
Fine.
or total chaos.
Yep.
But let's not forget those scenarios that would be truly historic,
Oh, yeah.
the ones that make political scientists rewrite the textbooks.
Absolutely.
Right.
Those are the ones.
Hit us with them.
Okay.
What are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, an electoral college tie
Yeah,
is entirely possible with how close this race is.
right.
Imagine 269 electoral votes for each candidate.
Okay. I'm imagining it, and it's making me sweat a little.
That's a real nail-biter.
What happens in that scenario?
That would trigger what's called a contingent election.
Okay.
The House of Representatives, with each state delegation getting one vote,
Right.
would choose the president.
Okay.
And get this, even if one party controls the House, there's no guarantee they'd win the presidency.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
You're saying even if, let's say the Republicans have a majority,
Right.
some of their representatives could vote for Harris.
Absolutely.
Really?
There's a concept called faithless electors, where individuals go against their party's directive.
Oh, wow.
Plus, you have states with split delegations,
Okay.
meaning their House members come from different parties.
Right?
Imagine the negotiations, the backroom deals,
Oh, my gosh.
the potential for political maneuvering.
Talk about a constitutional crisis.
Oh, that'd be wild.
It sounds like pure pandemonium.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so contingent election check.
Yeah.
What's the other critical scenario we need to be aware of?
The other scenario that's very possible,
Okay.
and perhaps even more controversial,
All right.
is a split between the popular vote and the Electoral College.
You're saying Trump could win the Electoral College while losing the popular vote.
It's possible.
Didn't we see that in 2016?
You're right, it did happen then.
Yeah.
And it caused a lot of debate. And forecasts suggest it could happen again this year.
Wow.
What's interesting is that the majority of Americans, around 63%,
Okay.
actually support electing the president by popular vote.
So we have a system that many feel is outdated
Right.
and doesn't necessarily reflect the will of the people.
Yeah.
And yet here we are potentially facing the same situation all over again.
It definitely raises some questions about the Electoral College and its role in our modern democracy.
It does. And you know what?
Yeah.
Before we dive into the real-time results and analyze what's happening in those crucial swing states,
Yeah.
let's take a moment to understand the system a bit better.
Okay.
Why do we even have an electoral college?
Right.
What were the founding fathers thinking?
That's a great question. Let's go back in time a little bit.
Okay, so back to the electoral college.
Yep.
It's been around since the beginning,
Right.
but it seems like there's always debate about it.
Absolutely.
What were the founding fathers thinking when they created it?
Well, imagine you're back in the 1780s. Communication is slow travel, is arduous.
Right.
And the nation is a collection of states with very different interests.
Gotcha.
The founders were wary of giving too much power
Yeah.
to a few large populous states.
Okay.
So they created the Electoral College as a kind of compromise.
A compromise.
Yeah.
So they were trying to balance the power between big states and small states.
Exactly. The idea was to give smaller states a bit more sway in the presidential election.
Okay.
Each state gets a number of electors based on its representation in Congress.
Right.
The number of senators plus the number of representatives.
Okay.
This ensures that even states with smaller populations have a voice in choosing the president.
I can see how that would have made sense back then. But
Yeah.
does it still hold up today?
Well,
I mean, communication is instant. We're much more interconnected as a nation.
right.
And it seems like the Electoral College could potentially go against the will of the majority.
That's the heart of the debate.
Yeah.
Critics argue that it's undemocratic and undermines the principle of one person, one vote.
Right.
They point to instances like 2016,
Okay.
where Trump won the presidency despite losing the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes.
Right.
It raises the question of whether the Electoral College is still serving its intended purpose,
Yeah.
or if it's become an obstacle to truly represented democracy.
So what are the arguments in favor of keeping the Electoral College?
Well, supporters argue that it prevents a few large urban areas
Oh.
from dominating the election
Okay.
and forces candidates to campaign
Right.
in a wider range of states,
Okay.
including rural areas that might otherwise be ignored.
I see.
They also argue that it protects against tyranny of the majority,
Right.
the idea that a small number of highly populated states could impose their will on the rest of the country.
So it's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
It is a very complex issue.
It sounds like this election could really reignite that debate,
Absolutely.
especially if we see another split between the popular vote and the Electoral College.
It's definitely something to watch for.
For sure. But for now,
Yeah.
let's shift gears
Mm-hmm.
and look at those critical scenarios we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
That Electoral College tie, for instance.
Uh-huh.
How would that actually play out if it happened?
Right. So let's imagine a scenario
Okay.
where neither candidate reaches the 270 electoral votes needed to win.
Right.
The 12th Amendment kicks in.
Okay.
And the election for president is thrown to the House of Representatives.
To the House.
Each state gets one vote,
Whoa.
regardless of its size or population.
So California, with its 53 representatives, has the same voting power as Wyoming, which only has one.
Exactly.
Wow.
So it's not about the number of representatives a state has,
Right.
but how united those representatives are.
Gotcha.
It comes down to how each state's delegation votes.
Okay.
Now, you might think that if a party controls the House,
Yeah.
they'd automatically win the presidency in a contingent election.
Right.
But it's not that simple.
Okay.
Remember those faithless electors we talked about?
That can happen here, too. Wow. Plus, some states have split delegations,
Right.
meaning their House members come from different parties.
Yeah.
So a contingent election wouldn't just be about which party has the majority in the House,
Gotcha.
but about individual representatives making deals, negotiating, and potentially going against their party's wishes.
That is wild.
It's a very interesting and complex process.
Precisely.
And don't forget, the Senate gets to choose the vice president in a contingent election.
Oh, right.
There's no guarantee they'd choose the running mate of the House-elected president.
Okay, my head is officially spinning.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
So we've got the potential for an electoral college tie,
Right.
a contingent election, and a possible split between the popular vote and the electoral college.
Yes.
Is there anything else we need to be aware of as we watch the results come in?
Well, there's one more concept we haven't touched on yet that could come into play, especially in close races.
Okay.
The blue shift.
You mentioned that earlier? Yeah. But can you explain why this happens?
Sure. It has to do with the different ways people vote.
Okay.
And when those votes are counted.
Okay.
In many states, in-person votes, which tend to lean slightly more Republican, are tallied first.
Right.
Then as mail-in ballots, which have been increasingly popular among Democratic voters, are processed and counted.
Yeah.
The margin between the candidates can narrow.
So we might see a candidate with an early lead.
Yes.
See that lead shrink as more mail-in ballots are counted?
Exactly. It happened in key states like Pennsylvania and Georgia in 2020. And it's something to keep in mind as we watch the results unfold tonight.
Gotcha.
It's a reminder that early leads don't always tell the full story.
Right.
And we need to be patient.
For sure.
As all the votes are tallied.
So we need to be aware of the blue shift and how it can impact the race.
Absolutely.
Anything else we should be watching for?
One more thing.
Okay.
This election isn't just about the presidency.
Control of the Senate is also up for grabs.
The Senate races.
Yeah.
Right? We can't forget about those.
And there are some incredibly close races that could determine which party holds the majority.
What are some of the key races we should be paying attention to?
Well, one of the most closely watched races is in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania again.
Where the incumbent Democrat is facing a tough challenge from a Republican newcomer.
Okay.
This race could have major implications, not only for the balance of power in the Senate, but also for the political landscape of Pennsylvania, a key swing state.
Pennsylvania seems to be at the center of everything tonight.
It really does.
What about other key Senate races?
We're also seeing nail-biters in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada.
Okay.
All states that could determine control of the chamber.
Right.
These races are incredibly tight.
Wow.
And the outcome could have a significant impact on the next president's ability to enact their agenda.
So it's not just about who wins the presidency, but also about the composition of Congress and how that will shape the political landscape for the next 4 years.
Exactly. The outcome of these Senate races could determine whether the next president has a Congress that's willing to work with them.
Okay.
Or one that's determined to obstruct their agenda at every turn.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a moment to gather the latest updates.
Okay.
Analyze the trends we're seeing.
All right.
And get ready to dive into those state-by-state results.
That was good.
When we come back, we'll explore how those critical scenarios are playing out in real time.
Okay.
Break down those key Senate races.
Right.
And continue to monitor this historic election as it unfolds.
Looking forward to it.
Stay with us. And we're back, ready to dive into the latest numbers.
Yeah.
And see how those critical scenarios we've been discussing are actually playing out.
Right.
It's getting late.
It is.
But with so much still up in the air,
yeah,
I doubt anyone's heading to bed just yet.
I wouldn't recommend it. This election is living up to all the hype, tight races across the board. Key states hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
And the potential for some truly historic outcomes.
All right, so let's start with those swing states that everyone's been glued to all night.
Right.
What's the latest from the battlegrounds?
Well, Georgia's still a toss-up.
Oh, really?
Harris is holding on to a very slim lead.
Okay.
But it's within the margin of error.
Right.
So we can't call it just yet.
Okay. Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
They're finally starting to report some numbers.
They are.
And as expected, it's a slow process.
Very slow.
Trump seems to have an edge there right now.
It seems that way.
But remember, they're still processing a lot of those mail-in ballots, so things could shift.
Absolutely.
Pennsylvania always keeps us on the edge of our seats.
Always.
What about Michigan?
Yeah.
We saw some early indications that Trump might be pulling ahead there.
Right. That early lead has evaporated.
Oh, wow.
It's basically a dead heat now.
Really?
With both candidates hovering around that 49% mark.
So Michigan is definitely going down to the wire.
It is. And speaking of nail-biters, Arizona is still neck and neck.
Okay.
With no clear frontrunner.
So we've got Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan.
Yeah.
All too close to call.
Too close to call.
What about those other crucial swing states?
Yeah.
Wisconsin, Nevada, and North Carolina.
Okay, well, Wisconsin, true to form,
right,
is keeping us in suspense, leaning ever so slightly towards Harris.
Okay.
But again, it's within the margin of error.
Gotcha.
So we can't count Trump out.
All right.
Nevada is still diligently counting those votes.
Okay.
And they're currently showing a small lead for Harris.
Okay.
But remember, they were one of the last states to finalize their results in 2020.
Right.
So we might be waiting a while for a definitive answer.
Patience is a virtue.
It is.
Especially on election night.
Absolutely.
Okay, last but not least, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
That was another state that was considered a must-win for both candidates.
Right. North Carolina is actually starting to trend towards Trump. He's currently holding a lead of about 2 percentage points.
Okay.
Which isn't insurmountable, but definitely gives him an advantage at this point.
So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
We've got tight races across the board, a handful of states that could go either way, and a nation holding its breath.
Right.
This is what election night dreams are made of.
It's incredible.
But before we get too caught up in the presidential race, let's not forget about those Senate races we talked about.
Oh, definitely.
Control of the upper chamber is also up for grabs tonight.
Right.
And that could have huge impact on the next president's agenda.
Absolutely. Those Senate races are crucial. Yeah. And just like the presidential contest, we're seeing some incredibly close contests.
Yeah.
That could determine which party holds the majority.
All right, give us the rundown.
Okay.
Which Senate races are we watching most closely, and what's at stake?
Well, we already mentioned Pennsylvania. Right. Where that incumbent Democrat is fighting to hold on to his seat against a strong Republican challenger. Yeah. If the Republican wins, it could flip the seat and shift the balance of power in the Senate.
So Pennsylvania is a key state to watch, both for the presidency and the Senate.
It is.
Any other Senate races we should have on our radar?
Definitely keep an eye on Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada.
Okay.
Those are all states with tight Senate races that could determine control of the chamber.
Right.
The candidates are all neck and neck.
Wow.
And the outcome will likely depend on how the rest of the votes shake out.
So we're potentially looking at another long night.
It seems likely.
Maybe even a long week as we wait for those final votes to be counted and those key races to be decided.
Right.
But beyond the numbers, beyond the winners and losers,
right.
What does this election tell us about the state of American democracy?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
This election has revealed some deep divisions within our society.
Yeah.
A sense of distrust in our institutions. And a political system that sometimes seems more focused on winning than on governing.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the drama, the excitement, the back and forth of election night.
Right.
But it's important to step back and reflect on the bigger picture.
I agree.
This election isn't just about who occupies the White House.
Right.
Or which party controls Congress.
Right.
It's about who we are as a nation and what kind of future we want to create together.
I think that's a really important point.
It's a reminder that despite our differences, we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
And that our votes, our voices, our engagement in the democratic process matter.
I think that's the most important takeaway from tonight.
Yeah.
Regardless of the outcome, this election has shown that Americans care deeply about the future of their country.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this very special deep dive.
Okay.
It's been an incredible journey full of twists and turns, surprises and insights. But remember, this is just the beginning.
Right.
The story of the 2024 election and the story of American democracy is far from over. Stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful. We'll see you on the other side.